So starting from that basis, yes, then we can draw out, okay, for TBI and concussions, what happens? Okay, so when you have a concussion, there's damage done at the moment of impact, and there is swelling and scarring that occurs, which interferes with future ability for blood flow to come into the neurons. And so you end up when you scan people after a TBI or concussion, there's hypometabolism. So not enough metabolism is going on inside of the neurons. And it is interesting because ketones, as you mentioned, there's this fork in the road. Ketones go through this other pathway that's separate from glucose. It's related on some parts of the pathway, but it's different enough that it is able to get through and rescue brain activity, because in these instances where glucose cannot, it's a different type of molecule. It requires different cofactors to metabolize. Glucose cannot get through. Ketones can rescue brain energy. And so that's actually a really interesting area of application that we look at with the DoD, because there's, I don't know, you're jumping out of airplanes and stuff's exploding. Like there's, I think that people probably get it, that there's TBIs and concussions happening. It's also really interesting, for instance, we work closely with some groups within the NFL, because if you're banging your head around all day, there's a strong argument to be made that almost by default, you should just drink ketones after a game, whether you had a concussion or, you had some subconcussive knocks to the head,
even if it's subclinical, right? Even if you're not displaying any sympathetic escape or dilation of the pupils or anything like that, maybe it is I love that. Maybe there is a really great application for some post-game ketone supplementation in the event that there's some hypoglucose, some, we'll say, inferior fuel partitioning of glucose.
Yeah. Yeah, might as well, for abundance of caution, prophylactic. And then another area you touched on as well was just general hypometabolism. Generally, when there's not enough metabolism going on in the brain, which happens, for instance, in Alzheimer's, where Alzheimer's interferes with the brain's ability to do metabolism. So there's this really interesting, well, first of all, Alzheimer's is becoming widely understood as not just this neurological disease, but a metabolic disease. There's massive correlation with Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes. And we are getting to it almost near consensus, or there's a very vocal understanding that Alzheimer's itself is a metabolic disease. At least some instances of the disease. It's a complicated disease where basically you have insulin resistance. And just to back it up for a second for people, that when you eat sugar, your blood sugar goes up, and then your pancreas releases insulin to address that blood sugar. If you do that too much over your life, the insulin stops working. Your body stops listening to that insulin. You get insulin resistance. And then no matter how much sugar you eat, you don't feel any energy. You don't feel energetic, because the insulin that you're trying to release, it is not working. And when you have this insulin resistance in the brain, that's Alzheimer's. And so there's a really interesting study on this researcher, Stephen Cunnane. Maybe people have heard of him. He's one of the, I would say, just goats of the space, where he did a study with MCTs. So MCT is a form of fat, medium chain triglyceride, that relatively efficiently turns into ketones. So it's not even a direct ketone drink per se. It's just a form of fat that can convert into ketones pretty easily. And even with that, he showed these amazing results where basically he had Alzheimer's patients. So they have hypometabolism, not enough metabolism going on in the brain, and reduced cognitive function. And then you're kind of on this spiral, because if the neurons aren't functioning correctly, then they get worse. It spirals where they build up more. There's more neuropathology that develops, and less glucose can get in, and then it gets worse and worse. That with this MCT diet that was inducing patients to create their own ketones, that they were able to reverse this, and they were able to reverse. There's 5 different markers for cognitive functioning, including one of the major ones for tracking Alzheimer's specifically. They were able to reverse these. So people were not just slowing down their Alzheimer's, they were basically throwing a life raft via ketones to their neurons, and those neurons were able to swim again. So it's pretty interesting stuff. And this is where it's okay, well, the keto diet is cool. Get Beachbod ready if you want to do the keto diet. But there's clearly something going on with ketones per se, where irrespective of keto diet, yes or no, like that the ketones themselves have this certain property that's it's not just this thing for weight loss people.
What I think is so interesting about what you're talking about is that we know that generally as we age, just as a consequence of aging, we tend to become more insulin resistant in general. So if you're already consuming a higher, you sort of have these big spikes, these like postprandial big glucose spikes, let's say, which will follow, big insulin spikes. Over time, as you were saying, we habituate to that. So the same level of insulin is not going to do the same amount of job. This is what we see the fate of type 2 diabetics, right? Over time, we invariably, if they're using insulin as a therapy, they over time always have to up their insulin levels because the body habituates to that hormone. But it does seem like ketone metabolism doesn't attenuate over it. It doesn't seem to decrease in the same way, let's say, that glucose metabolism does as we age. Is there any literature or any thoughts that you have on ketone metabolism as we age? Do we see changes along the spectrum or along the arc of life, let's say?
No. And the reason is that it's non-insulin mediated. So you do not need insulin in order to metabolize ketones. And so as a result, ketone metabolism scales with substrate availability. So like if you have twice as much ketones, you're metabolizing twice as much ketones then.
There's you get better as you use more of it? Is that what you're saying?
That's true too. I was just saying that if you just today take one dose of ketone IQ and versus you take 2 doses, if you have 2, then there's twice as much available in your bloodstream and you'll be doing twice as much metabolism. It's not gated. There was a study done where they basically showed that, okay, we can measure how much metabolism is going on. And as they ratcheted up the amount of ketone availability, the amount of metabolism scaled directly proportional. Basically, it's not blocked. Like there's not an insulin blocker the way that there is with glucose, where if you increase glucose levels 2x, maybe metabolism 2x is, but if your insulin isn't working, maybe it doesn't 2x. Like that, with ketones, there isn't that dynamic where ketone metabolism just scales with the amount that you have available. And to answer your question, actually, on okay, well, do you get better at it? Yes, you also get better at it. I think people are familiar with like becoming more keto adapted or metabolically flexible, where, if you've been eating high carb diet your whole life, the first time that you try not eating carbs, it's hard on 2 counts. One is that your body has a harder time making ketones. There's enzymes involved that you have not ramped up yet. So you're going to have a harder time making ketones, and then you're going to have a harder time metabolizing ketones because, again, your body hasn't been doing it and you don't have the enzymes built up. It's all in your genetic codes. That's the silver lining there, where like anyone can become metabolically flexible by changing up their lifestyle and eating lower carb, being more active, and increasing the amount that their body is able to make and use ketones. One thing that's interesting about drinking a ketone, an exogenous ketone, is that it actually helps on that second component, which is the enzymes involved with metabolizing the ketone. So drinking a ketone is not going to help your body to make more ketones. It's kind of separate. If anything, it will actually temporarily slow it down because you have ketones present, your body doesn't need to make it. But what it does help you do is accelerate the rate at which you are metabolizing. You will increase the amount of ketone metabolizing enzymes that are circulating. So it helps you to become more keto adapted. So that's where when people are trying to go low carb or keto, where exogenous ketones can help play a role, like ketone IQ can play a role. But I'm very careful to say this is not like a cure-all. And I think what you were saying earlier is there's been a lot of like, wham, like ketone weight loss, shred the pounds off. Like it's just like way more nuanced than that. Like ketone, you're fundamentally eating calories. Like there's calories inside of those ketones. If you use them correctly, yes, you can induce your body to be more metabolically flexible. If you use them in conjunction with a lower carb diet, if you're more active, then they can, certainly you can benefit from it. But it's not this like zap the pounds off magic supplement that I think in a lot of ways set the space back in an unproductive way.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments there, because it often seems like even people who are just looking for answers, and I don't fault anybody, because there is a lot of conflicting information when you're trying to look at how am I going to improve my health. We have plant doctors, we have carnivore doctors, we have keto doctors, we have like all these different so it can be really confusing for the consumer. But what I often like to get back to is like, what are the fundamental basics? And I think when we talk about substrate, right, ketones are a fundamental substrate from an evolutionary lens that have been with us for, hundreds of thousands of years, that have, propagated the survival of the species. So we want to be considerate of that. But it's not just what's the one supplement that I'm going to take to lose weight, although I will say that it does have a bit of an appetite, suppressing effect. Whenever I take Ketone IQ, I typically, I work out in the morning. That's the time where I can get my workout in. So I usually do it fasted. And this morning, for example, woke up and just like for whatever reason, didn't have the best sleep last night. Like I couldn't get my mind to shut off. I was thinking about things, woke up, maybe once or twice overnight. And then when I woke up this morning, I was like, oh God, I have legs today. So went downstairs, I have a little home gym, and then took my Ketone IQ with some, I have like a little electrolytes in the morning, and was able to not only just get through my workout, but have a great workout. But I know that the days that I take Ketone IQ, so leg day, it's leg day for me today. I know I'm hungry. Like I'm always hungrier the days that I do leg day, but I'm not as ravenous, let's say today, because I took that Ketone IQ in the morning, than I would be otherwise. So it does seem that there is some appetite suppressing, effect of taking ketone bodies. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was this really interesting study done where the researcher had two participant groups, one that was taking placebo and one that was taking ketones. The placebo was, they gave the same amount of calories to both. So it was 100 grams of sugar.
Isocaloric, yeah.
Isocaloric, 100 grams of sugar versus 100 grams of ketone. Sorry, it's 100 calories worth. 100 calories of sugar versus 100 calories of ketones. And they showed that the ketones were that ketone group was significantly appetite suppressed compared to the sugar group. So on subjective measures of like, hey, how hungry are you on a scale of 1 to 10? The sugar group felt hungrier sooner. And then when they looked at ghrelin, the hunger hormone, they did blood draws. They showed just objectively on that blood draw that people with elevated ketones from exogenous ketones had ghrelin was suppressed. So super interesting there, which I don't think is that crazy for people to wrap their minds around, where like just different calories are different. Like different calories are more satiating. You have on the one end, like a lot of what's in the, 7-Eleven or the aisles of the grocery store. I think a lot of people know, try to shop the perimeter of the grocery store, not the aisles. A lot of the highly engineered carbohydrates, potato chips, candy, like stuff's really addicting, AKA it is not satiating. It does not scratch the itch. In fact, like you eat it and like you get itchier. Like you eat, like try just having 3 potato chips. You know what I mean? It's like you're either having 0 or you're having like half a bag.
The whole bag. Yeah. Or half a bag for you, the whole bag for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just being, yeah.